My fiancé's mom slid a prenup across the dinner table like a test, then made everyone watch me sign. I said no. 2 days later, my lawyer called me in urgently and asked for the email headers, because one strange word in that contract, Stonebridge, didn't belong there. My name is Ethan. I'm 38 and I live just outside Raleigh, North Carolina. I'm a project manager for a mid-size construction tech firm, nothing flashy, but steady work that I'm proud of. I've always been the kind of guy who believes in quiet consistency. Show up, do what you said you'd do, keep your word, and don't turn every disagreement into a performance. That last part mattered more than I realized, because the moment I got engaged, my life became a performance for someone else. Her name is Claire. Claire is the best thing that happened to me in a long time. Sharp, warm, practical, and genuinely kind in a way that isn't just nice. The kind where she remembers the names of people who serve us at restaurants, where she notices if someone in a group is getting talked over, where she'll pull you aside later and check in without making it a big deal. We met at a friend's backyard cookout. I wasn't looking for anything serious. I'd come out of a long relationship that ended cleanly but left me tired. Claire and I ended up talking by the cooler, just making small talk that turned into real talk. I remember thinking, halfway through the conversation, oh, this one is different. We dated for 2 years before I proposed. Nothing dramatic, no flash mob, just a quiet weekend in the mountains, a little cabin, rain tapping the windows, and me asking her in the simplest way possible if she wanted to build a life with me. She said yes without hesitating, and for about a week I was floating. And then I met her mother properly. To be fair, I'd met her before. A quick hello here and there, a polite hug, the kind of interactions where you don't really know someone yet. But being the guy my daughter is dating, and being the man trying to marry my daughter are two very different categories in some families. Claire's mom, Diane, had a way of walking into a room like she owned not just the space but the mood. She was the type who didn't raise her voice much, because she didn't need to. Her tone did the raising for her. She dressed like she always had somewhere more important to be afterward. And she had this habit, this subtle thing of asking questions that sounded innocent, until you realized they were designed to measure you. Not understand you. Measure you. The first real dinner after we announced the engagement was at Claire's parents' house. Big place in a gated neighborhood, the kind of home where everything matches and nothing looks lived in. The table was set like it was a magazine shoot. Her father, Richard, was polite but distant, like he was determined not to have an opinion until Diane told him what it should be. Claire squeezed my hand under the table when Diane started in. So, Ethan, Diane said, cutting into her steak. Construction tech, right? That's stable. It wasn't a compliment. It was an evaluation. Yes, I said. It's been good to me. I like the work. And do you own your home? She asked, casually, like she was asking if I preferred coffee or tea. I smiled lightly. I own a townhouse. Mortgage, of course. She murmured. And Claire is moving into that? We're talking about options, I said. We haven't decided yet. Diane nodded as if I'd just confessed something. Claire has always been careful with her future. Claire's posture stiffened. I could feel it beside me, like a tiny storm cloud forming. I reached for my water, buying myself a second. Richard tried to soften it. Diane just wants what's best. I do, Diane said immediately, eyes on me. And what's best is clarity. Claire forced a smile. Mom, we're just having dinner. Diane gave a thin laugh. This is exactly when you should talk about these things, sweetheart. Before you sign paperwork, before you make mistakes you can't undo. I should tell you something about Claire. She's not weak, not even close. But she grew up in a house where Diane's opinions weren't just opinions. They were weather. You could ignore them for a while, but eventually you'd get soaked. So Claire tried to keep peace. I could see it in the way she redirected conversation, the way she smiled too much, the way she avoided certain topics like they were tripwires. That first dinner ended without an explosion. Diane hugged Claire tightly, kissed her cheek, and then hugged me with the kind of controlled pressure that didn't feel like affection. You seem like a sensible man, she said into my ear like she was giving me advice. Stay that way. On the drive home, Claire apologized. I'm sorry, she said quietly, staring out the passenger window. She gets intense. It's okay, I told her, and I meant it. She's your mom. She's protective. Claire's laugh was short and humorless. She's protective of control. I didn't respond right away. I wasn't trying to take sides. I also wasn't trying to miss what Claire was telling me. Still, at that moment, I thought it was just family nerves. Engagements do that. People get weird. I didn't realize Diane had already decided who I was. Over the next few weeks, the engagement became less about planning a wedding and more about passing a series of tests I didn't agree to take. There were comments first. Small, sharp ones. When Claire and I mentioned looking at venues, Diane said, "Well, I assume Ethan's family won't be contributing much, so we'll need to be realistic." When Claire talked about a honeymoon idea, Diane asked me, "And you've budgeted for that? Or is Claire paying?" Once, at a brunch with Claire's aunt and cousin, Diane laughed and said, "You know how it is these days. Men see a successful woman and think they hit the jackpot." Everyone chuckled politely, even though it wasn't funny. Claire went red. I kept my expression neutral because I knew what Diane wanted. A reaction, a defensive speech, anything she could twist into proof. If I got angry, I was aggressive. If I argued, I was difficult. If I stayed calm, she'd try harder. And she did. It shifted from comments to insinuations. Diane started telling people within earshot of me, always within earshot, that she was just being careful. Careful meant she dug into my background like I was applying for a security clearance. One evening, Claire got a call while we were cooking. She listened, face tightening, then muted the phone and whispered, "It's my mom. She wants to talk to you." I wiped my hands and took the phone. "Hi, Diane." "Ethan," she said brightly. Too brightly. "I'm so glad I caught you." I had a thought. "Okay, I think it's time we discuss a prenuptial agreement," she said, like she was suggesting a restaurant. "Nothing personal, of course. It's just smart." My chest tightened slightly, not because of the concept. I'm not anti-prenup. I believe people can do them fairly, with independent counsel, no coercion, full disclosure. The word itself didn't offend me. Her tone did. "A prenup could make sense," I said carefully. "Claire and I can talk about it." "Oh, sweetheart," Diane replied, and I hated how comfortable she sounded calling me that. "You don't need to worry about talking her into it. Claire understands. She's always understood. She just needs you to be reasonable." Reasonable, like I'd been unreasonable already. "I'd want to review anything with my own attorney," I said. A pause. Not long, but deliberate. "Of course," Diane said. "We already have a draft. Our attorney prepares these all the time. Very standard. We'll send it over." I almost asked, "Our attorney?" But I let it go. "Send it," I said. "I'll take a look." "Wonderful," she said, and then her voice sharpened just slightly. "And Ethan? Please don't make this into a battle. I know how emotional things can get when money is involved." There it was, the real accusation, tucked into a polite sentence like a blade hidden in a bouquet. After the call, Claire looked like she wanted to disappear. "I didn't know she was going to do it like that," she said quickly. "I swear. I'm not upset with you," I told her. "But we need to handle this together." Claire nodded, but her eyes were glossy. "She thinks you're after me." "That's not what this is," I said, keeping my voice low. "This is about control, and she's using money as the tool." Claire didn't answer, which told me she knew I wasn't wrong. The draft arrived 2 days later by email. Not from Diane directly, of course not. It came from her attorney, a PDF with a formal letterhead, and a subject line that felt more like a warning than a message. I opened it at my kitchen table after work, scrolling slowly, trying to understand the spirit of it. And the spirit of it was simple. I was a risk to be managed. The terms were lopsided in a way that wasn't even subtle. Anything Claire had was hers. Anything she gained would be hers. Anything I brought in, my townhouse, my retirement contributions, any future increases were treated like they were suspect. There were sections that read like I might wake up one day and decide to empty her accounts out of spite, even though Claire and I had never even fought about money. One clause talked about reimbursement for premarital contributions to shared living arrangements, and it was written in a way that felt like a trap. Another part referenced family-provided housing support, even though Claire and I hadn't received any housing support, not from anyone. That was the first moment my calm started to crack, not outwardly but inside, because it wasn't just unfair, it was sloppy, it was loaded with assumptions and strange language that didn't match our actual life, and I remember thinking, why is this drafted like they're trying to document something else? I closed the laptop, took a breath, and told myself not to spiral. Legal documents can sound harsh. Attorneys sometimes write aggressively because they're paid to protect their client. That's the charitable explanation. But it didn't explain Diane's satisfaction every time she brought it up. The next weekend we went to dinner with Claire's family again. Diane had invited us, along with Claire's aunt, her cousin, and a couple of family friends. It wasn't a celebration dinner. It felt like a staging area. Before we left, I told Claire, "I'm not signing anything tonight." "I know," she whispered, voice trembling. I told her. She said, "It's just a conversation." I adjusted my jacket, trying to keep things normal. If it's just a conversation, then there's no pressure. Claire looked at me like she wanted to believe that. Then she nodded and grabbed her purse. At her parents' house, the dining room was louder than usual. Too many people, too many glasses clinking, too much laughter that didn't reach anyone's eyes. Diane greeted me with a smile that looked practiced. "Ethan," she said, leaning in, "I'm so glad you could make it." I realized immediately what she'd done. She hadn't invited witnesses by accident. She'd invited an audience. Claire and I sat where we were placed because Diane placed people like pieces on a board. I tried to keep my attention on Claire, on the food, on the polite topics. Then Diane waited until the plates were cleared, until the wine had been poured again, until the room was warm with conversation, and she steered it where she wanted it. "So," Diane said, tapping her napkin lightly on the table, "I spoke with our attorney. He said the prenup is ready to finalize." Claire's fork froze midair. I set my glass down carefully. I received the draft. "And?" Diane asked, eyebrows lifting. "You're comfortable with it?" Every face at the table turned toward me in that subtle way people do when they're pretending not to watch. I kept my tone even. "I haven't had my attorney review it yet." Diane's smile tightened. "Your attorney?" "Yes," I said. "It's important that we both have independent counsel." Diane leaned back slightly, as if disappointed but not surprised. "Of course, it's just, time is a factor. Vendors, deposits, planning. We can't have uncertainty." Richard finally spoke, softly. "This is standard, Ethan. Don't take it personally." Diane looked around the table, then back at me. "And to be transparent," she added, voice louder now, "I'm doing this because I've seen too many men marry into a good family and then take what isn't theirs." My stomach dropped. Not because I felt guilty, but because I understood the game. She wasn't negotiating. She was branding me. Someone laughed awkwardly. Claire's aunt looked down at her hands. Claire's face went pale. I met Diane's eyes and said, calmly, "I'm not here to take anything. I'm here to marry your daughter." Diane nodded slowly, like she'd expected that line. "Then you'll sign." It wasn't a question. It was a corner. And in that moment, with the whole table holding its breath, I realized this dinner wasn't about celebration at all. It was about pressure. And Diane had chosen her timing on purpose. The room stayed quiet for just a beat too long, the way it does when someone has made a threat sound like a polite request. Claire's cousin cleared his throat like he wanted to disappear into the chair. Richard stared at the table, suddenly fascinated by the grain of the wood. Diane's eyes stayed on me, calm and expectant, like she'd already decided the outcome and was just waiting for me to do the obedient thing and confirm it. Claire finally spoke. "Mom, stop. He just said he wants his attorney to review it." Diane turned to her with a patient smile. "Sweetheart, that's what people say when they want to delay. And delaying is how you lose leverage." I looked at Claire, then back at Diane. "No one is losing leverage. This isn't a business deal." Diane gave a soft laugh. "Marriage is absolutely a business deal. The problem is that some people pretend it isn't, and those are the ones you have to watch." I felt my jaw tighten, but I kept my voice even. "If you're watching me, then watch this. I'm not signing anything tonight." Diane's smile didn't drop. It sharpened. "Then you're refusing to protect Claire." That phrasing, "protect Claire," was her favorite weapon. It made her sound noble. It made me sound dangerous. It flipped the roles without any evidence. Claire's hand slid onto my knee under the table, a quiet, grounding touch. She was shaking. "I'm not refusing to protect her," I said. "I'm refusing to be pressured in front of an audience." Diane blinked slowly, like she was surprised I'd named it. Then she looked around the table with the theatrical innocence of someone who knows exactly what she's doing. "An audience," she repeated. "Ethan, this is family." "Exactly," I said. "Family doesn't need an audience for a signature." There it was, the first crack in her script. Not a big one, but enough that I saw it. Diane didn't expect me to keep calm. She expected me to either fold or blow up. And the truth was, staying calm wasn't just strategy. It was the only way to keep Claire from being torn in half in front of people she'd known her whole life. Diane set her napkin down with slow precision. "Fine," she said. "No signature tonight." Claire exhaled, relieved. Then Diane leaned forward again and finished her thought, eyes on me. "But we will have clarity soon. Because if you love my daughter, you won't mind proving it." Proving it. As if love needed a contract drafted by someone else's attorney, and shoved across a dinner table. We left early. Claire mumbled excuses. Diane hugged her too tightly again. Diane didn't hug me this time. She just looked at me like she'd filed me into a category. On the drive home, Claire stared straight ahead, hands clenched around her purse strap. "I'm sorry," she said again, voice small. "Stop apologizing," I told her. "You didn't do this." "She's going to keep pushing," Claire whispered. "You don't know her like I do." I nodded once. "Then we get ahead of it." Claire turned to me. "How?" I didn't answer immediately, because I didn't want to say the wrong thing. This wasn't just about legal paperwork. This was about Claire's relationship with her mother, and the way Diane's control had been normalized for decades. "I get my attorney involved," I said finally. "Not to fight, to make it clean, fair, transparent." Claire swallowed. "Mom will take that as an insult." "Then she was never asking for fairness," I said, and hated how true it sounded. That night after Claire went to bed, I opened the prenup again. I read it slower. Not like a guy skimming terms, but like a guy looking for what doesn't fit. And the more I read, the more the odd language bothered me. There were repeated references to separate property residence, family loan considerations, and third-party secured interests. It read like someone had taken a normal prenup template and jammed in extra phrases that were meant to do something beyond protect Claire. It also had a schedule, an attachment, listing assets disclosed by the parties. Claire's part listed a savings account and a modest investment account. Nothing insane. She did well, but not trust fund well. But Diane kept talking like Claire was sitting on a gold mine and I was digging. The numbers didn't match the story. And then I saw something that made me sit up. The draft referenced a Stonebridge property in a way that suggested it was connected to Claire's side, but it wasn't listed as Claire's asset. It wasn't listed as Diane's asset. It was floating, a property name with legal language wrapped around it like someone trying to acknowledge it without admitting ownership. Stonebridge. I'd heard Diane mention Stonebridge once just in passing when she bragged about the family's real estate decisions. Claire had rolled her eyes at the time and told me her mom loved name-dropping neighborhoods like they were trophies. I stared at the word on my screen and felt that low, cold instinct that something was off. I didn't know what it meant yet, but it didn't belong in a straightforward prenup. The next morning I called a lawyer. Not a friend who knows a guy. A real family law attorney with a reputation for being calm, meticulous, and impossible to bully. His name was Martin Hale, late 50s, silver hair, quiet voice. He'd helped one of my coworkers through a nasty divorce without turning it into a circus, and that mattered to me. I didn't want war. I wanted protection from manipulation. Martin asked me to send the document over and book a consultation. When I forwarded the prenup draft, I also included Diane's attorney email and asked Martin to note anything strange about the way it was delivered. Then I sat back and waited. Waiting sounds passive, but it wasn't. It was restraint. It was me refusing to step into Diane's pace. 2 days later, Martin called me. "Ethan," he said, "I reviewed the draft you sent. Do you have time to come in today?" The tone wasn't alarmed. It was measured, but it wasn't casual either. "I can be there in an hour," I said. At his office, Martin printed the prenup and laid it out with colored tabs. The amount of attention he'd already given it made me feel both relieved and uneasy. "First," he said, "I want you to know something. Prenups aren't inherently bad, but this one isn't standard." I nodded. I got that impression. Martin slid the pages slightly toward me. "There are terms here that are unusually one-sided, but that's not the part I'm most concerned about." He tapped a section with the back of his pen. "This document includes references to property interests and third-party obligations that do not belong in a simple prenup between two professionals with modest assets." "Like Stonebridge," I said. Martin's eyes flicked up. "Yes, Stonebridge." He turned the page and pointed. "This is drafted like someone wants to create a paper trail that a certain property is considered separate from the marital estate under certain conditions, while also acknowledging that funds from the marriage could touch it." My throat went a little dry. Why would they do that? Martin didn't answer right away. He just said, "People draft documents for reasons. Sometimes the reason they give you isn't the real reason." He leaned back. "Tell me about Claire's mother." So I did. I told him about the dinner, the audience, the pressure, the insinuations. I told him Diane kept calling me reasonable like it was a leash. I told him Claire was caught between wanting peace and wanting independence. Martin listened without reacting, which was exactly what I needed. When I finished, he said, "Here's how we handle this. We don't argue with Diane. We don't debate motives. We respond professionally." He handed me a yellow legal pad with 3 bullet points written neatly. 1. Independent counsel for both parties. 2. Full financial disclosure from both parties. 3. No signing under pressure. We schedule a meeting at a neutral location. You and Claire need to talk, Martin said. And you need to be clear. You're willing to consider a fair prenup, but you will not accept a document that reads like a trap. I nodded, but my mind was still stuck on Stonebridge. Should we ask what that property is? Martin's expression stayed neutral. Not yet. Not directly. If you accuse someone of hiding something, they close ranks. Instead, we request clarification and documentation as part of disclosure. Let them explain it. That evening, Claire came over after work. She took one look at my face and knew something had shifted. What? She asked, setting her keys down too hard. I didn't want to scare her. I also didn't want to keep her in the dark. I met with my attorney, I said. Claire's shoulders tensed. Okay. He thinks the prenup is not standard. I continued carefully. There are clauses that don't make sense. Claire frowned. Like what? I hesitated. There's a property mentioned. Stonebridge. Do you know what that is? Claire blinked, then shook her head slowly. Stonebridge is a neighborhood. Mom always talks like we're connected to it somehow, but I thought it was just her bragging. Does your family own a property there? I asked. Claire's eyes narrowed like she was scanning her memory. Not that I know of. My parents live where they live. They don't have a vacation house. If they did, my mom would never shut up about it. I nodded, feeling the same strange discomfort tighten in my chest. Martin wants full disclosure. Claire sat down on my couch, hands gripping her knees. Mom is going to freak out. Claire, I said, sitting across from her, leaning forward. I'm not trying to turn your mom into the enemy, but she's trying to turn me into one. Claire's eyes filled, but she didn't let tears fall. She keeps telling people you're after our family. Our family, I repeated gently. But she doesn't talk about us like we're a family. She talks like your property. Claire flinched because it was blunt, but she didn't disagree. I love you, I said, steady. I'm not marrying your mother. I'm marrying you. I need you beside me in this. Claire swallowed, then nodded once. Okay, that nod mattered. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it was the first time I felt like Claire had chosen a side, even if just for a moment. We agreed on a plan. Claire would tell Diane we were open to a prenup, but only with independent counsel and a neutral meeting. No family dinners. No pressure. No just sign it now. Claire called her mother the next day on speakerphone while I sat quietly at the kitchen table, pretending to focus on my coffee. I didn't want to coach her. I wanted her to speak as herself. Diane answered on the second ring. Hi, sweetheart. Hi, Mom, Claire said, voice firm but controlled. Ethan and I talked. We're willing to do a prenup, but we're going to have our own attorneys review it, and we'll schedule a meeting somewhere neutral. The silence on the other end was immediate and heavy. Then Diane's voice came back, syrupy. Of course, honey. That's fine. I'm glad Ethan is coming around. Claire's jaw tightened. He was never against it. He just won't sign under pressure. A soft laugh. Pressure. Claire, you're being dramatic. I watched Claire's knuckles go white around her phone. Diane continued. But if Ethan is hiring an attorney, I hope he understands what that signals. It signals distrust. Claire took a breath. Mom, you're the one who brought lawyers into it first. Another pause. Then Diane's tone shifted, cooler. Fine, schedule your meeting. But I want it done quickly, and I want to be present. As Claire's mother, I have a right to know she's protected. Claire's eyes flicked to me, uncertain. I leaned toward the phone slightly, but I didn't speak yet. This was Claire's lane. Mom, Claire said, I'm 29. I don't need you in the room. Diane's voice sharpened like a snapped thread. Excuse me. Claire steadied herself. I love you. But this is between me and Ethan. You can have your attorney. He can represent your concerns. But you don't need to sit there and watch. The silence this time was longer. Then Diane said quietly, I see. So you've decided to prioritize him. Claire's eyes glistened. I've decided to prioritize my marriage. Diane exhaled in a way that sounded like disgust wrapped in disappointment. Schedule it, she said. But don't come crying to me later. The call ended. Claire set the phone down and stared at it like it had bitten her. Then she pressed her palms to her eyes. I hate this, she whispered. I moved closer, careful. I know. She's going to punish me, Claire said, voice trembling. Maybe not openly, but she will. That was the moment I fully understood something I'd only half seen before. Diane didn't just control with money and words. She controlled with emotional consequences, approval as currency, affection as leverage. I took Claire's hand. Then we set boundaries now, I said, or we live inside her boundaries forever. Claire nodded, but she looked scared. The meeting got scheduled for the following week at Martin Hale's office. Neutral ground. No dinner table, no audience, just paper, attorneys, and truth. Diane tried one last move before that meeting. She sent Claire a text that Claire showed me without a word. It said, "If Ethan loved you, he wouldn't need a lawyer to prove it." Claire stared at me, waiting for my reaction. I took a slow breath and said, "If your mom believed what she's saying, she wouldn't need a lawyer either." Claire's lips twitched, almost a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. That night, I couldn't sleep, not because I was afraid of signing a prenup, but because the more Diane pushed, the more I suspected the prenup wasn't about protecting Claire at all. It was about protecting something else. And whatever it was important enough that Diane was willing to humiliate me in front of family just to get my signature on her timing. The morning of the meeting, Martin called me before I left for work. "Ethan," he said, "I want you to bring one thing with you today." "What?" I asked. "Every email you have from Diane's attorney," he said, "including the original message with the attachment. I want the full headers if you can export them." I frowned. "Why?" Martin's voice stayed calm, but there was a note of focus in it. "Because sometimes the story isn't just in the contract. Sometimes it's in how the contract moves." I stared at my laptop screen, cursor hovering over the email chain, and felt that cold instinct again. "Okay," I said. "I'll bring everything." After I hung up, I forwarded Martin the full chain and pulled the technical details like he asked. I didn't fully understand what he was looking for, but as I watched the email load and saw the timestamps, I had a sudden uneasy thought. What if Diane wasn't just trying to get me to sign quickly? What if she was trying to make sure I never had time to notice what was already inside the document? Martin's office was on the 4th floor of a glass and brick building downtown, the kind of place that smelled faintly like coffee and printer toner. The lobby had that quiet, padded carpet hush where everyone speaks like they're in a library. It was the exact opposite of Diane's dining room, and that was the point. Claire met me there straight from work. She wore a navy blazer and had her hair pulled back tighter than usual, like she'd physically strapped herself into "I can handle this" mode. When she saw me, she reached for my hand like it was an anchor. "You okay?" I asked. Claire let out a breath that sounded like she'd been holding it all day. "I'm here." That was her way of saying, "I'm scared, but I'm not running." A few minutes later, Martin's assistant escorted us into a conference room. There was a long table, a pitcher of water, clean notepads, and exactly 0 opportunities for theatrics. Martin was already inside, standing at the far end, jacket off, sleeves slightly rolled, the picture of controlled competence. He nodded at Claire. "Claire, I'm Martin Hale. Thanks for coming." "Nice to meet you," Claire said, voice polite but tight. Martin looked at me. "Did you bring the email chain?" I handed him a folder and my laptop. "Everything I've got." "Good," he said. Not praise. Confirmation. We didn't have to wait long. Diane arrived with her attorney 10 minutes early, which felt intentional, like she wanted to establish dominance by being the first presence in the room. She walked in with that same composed energy, dressed in cream and gold like she'd coordinated with the building. Behind her was a man in his 40s with a stiff smile and a leather portfolio, her attorney, Charles Benton. Diane's gaze landed on Claire first. "Sweetheart." Claire stood. "Mom." Then Diane looked at me, and for the first time since the dinner, she smiled in a way that didn't even pretend to be warm. "Ethan," she said. "Diane," I replied, neutral. Charles Benton shook hands with Martin, introduced himself, and tried to steer the energy into professional cordial. Martin matched it, but I could tell he wasn't interested in social warmth. He was interested in structure. Everyone sat. Claire sat beside me. Diane sat across, close enough that I could see the subtle tightening at the corners of her mouth whenever Claire didn't look at her. Martin began. "We're here to discuss the proposed premarital agreement. Ethan has indicated he is open to a fair prenup, provided both parties have independent counsel and full disclosure." Diane tilted her head. "Full disclosure," she echoed, like it was a personal insult. Martin didn't blink. "Yes." Charles Benton jumped in smoothly. "Full disclosure is standard, Martin. We're not opposed. We just need to keep this efficient. The wedding timeline is approaching." Claire's eyes flicked to her mother. "The timeline isn't a reason to pressure anyone." Diane turned to her with a strained smile. "No one is pressuring anyone. We're just trying to be responsible." Martin slid a copy of the prenup draft across the table. his copy tabbed and annotated. I have concerns about several provisions, he said, calm and direct. This draft includes language referencing property interests and obligations that appear unrelated to Claire's disclosed assets. Charles glanced down, such as, Martin tapped a page, the Stonebridge property references. The air changed. It wasn't dramatic, but it was real, like someone had turned the temperature down a few degrees. Diane's expression stayed composed, but her eyes sharpened. Stonebridge is irrelevant. If it's irrelevant, Martin said, it shouldn't be in the contract. Charles cleared his throat. That section is simply intended to clarify that third-party family property will not become marital property by implication. Then identify it properly, Martin replied, and disclose the nature of the interest. Who owns it, what encumbrances exist, and why it needs special handling in a prenup between Claire and Ethan. Claire's eyebrows pulled together. Mom, what is he talking about? Diane didn't look at her right away. She looked at Charles. Charles spoke like he was reading from a mental script. There are family holdings. Claire cut in, voice rising slightly. Family holdings? Since when? Diane finally looked at her daughter, and her tone turned sweet in that dangerous way. Claire, not everything is your concern. Some things are adult matters. I felt Claire stiffen next to me like she'd been slapped. Martin's voice stayed level. Claire is a party to this agreement. Everything in it is her concern. Diane's smile thinned. Of course it is. Martin continued. Additionally, there are reimbursement provisions that appear designed to require Ethan to compensate for premarital contributions to shared living arrangements. We will not accept provisions that function as penalties. Charles opened his portfolio, acting mildly annoyed. That's a standard protection to prevent financial opportunism. I couldn't help it. I spoke, still calm but clear. If you think I'm an opportunist, why are we even here? Diane's eyes snapped to me. Because Claire loves you. And because love makes people blind. Claire's voice went sharp. Mom. Diane held up a hand like she was granting permission for everyone to calm down. I'm stating reality. Martin leaned forward slightly. Diane, you are not a party to this agreement. A beat. Diane stared at him, then laughed softly. That's cute. You're trying to push me out. But I'm her mother. Martin didn't flinch. You can advise your daughter. You cannot coerce her. And you cannot insert yourself as a controlling party. If that continues, this meeting ends. For a moment I thought Diane might actually stand up and leave just to create chaos. But instead she sat back, crossing her legs with slow precision. Fine, she said. I'm listening. Martin turned the conversation to disclosures, assets, debts, expected inheritances, business interests. Claire answered honestly. She had a retirement account, a savings account. No debt beyond her car payment and student loans she was almost done with. Nothing that matched Diane's goldmine narrative. Then Martin asked Charles for disclosures from Diane and Richard's side, since the draft repeatedly referenced family property support and third-party interests. Charles hesitated. This is a prenup, not a forensic audit. Martin's gaze stayed steady. If a document references third-party interests, you clarify them. Otherwise, you remove them. That's not an audit. That's basic drafting. Claire looked from Charles to Diane, confusion turning into suspicion. Mom, why is there family housing support language in there? You haven't given us anything. Diane's lips parted, then pressed together. It's protective language. Protective of what? Claire asked. Diane's voice sharpened. Protective of you. Claire's hands clenched in her lap. You keep saying that, but you won't answer questions. For the first time since I'd known her, Diane looked slightly thrown. Not because Claire questioned her, but because Claire did it in front of other adults who weren't under Diane's control. Diane glanced at Charles again. Charles said, we can provide a brief statement regarding family property interests, but we're not going to open up unrelated financial documents. Martin nodded once, like he'd expected that response. Then we will remove all references to Stonebridge, all references to third-party secured interests, and all references to family housing support. If you want a clean prenup, it should only cover Ethan and Claire's assets and future earnings. Diane's eyes narrowed. No. The word landed flat and final. Martin paused. No. Diane leaned forward. Stonebridge stays. Claire stared at her. Why? Diane's jaw tightened. Because it stays. Martin let silence hang for a moment, the way experienced attorneys do when they want everyone to hear how unreasonable someone is being. Then Martin said, Diane again, you are not a party. Diane's smile turned cold. Then Claire will insist it stays. Claire flinched. Mom, Diane cut her off. Claire, you don't understand what you're risking. Claire's voice shook. I don't even know what we're talking about. Diane looked at me, then at Martin, and her voice went silky. This is exactly why we wanted Ethan to sign quickly, before everyone started muddying the waters with suspicion and drama. There it was. Not a confession, but close enough to make my stomach turn. Martin folded his hands. I don't operate on sign quickly. I operate on sign correctly. Charles tried to salvage the moment. We're getting off track. The core purpose is simple. Claire's premarital assets remain hers. Martin nodded. Agreed. That's reasonable. Ethan is not disputing that. But the draft you sent doesn't stop there. He slid another page forward. There is a clause here under marital conduct and financial consequences that is problematic. Diane raised an eyebrow. Oh, Martin read aloud, slowly, so there was no room for misinterpretation. It establishes that if Ethan is deemed to have diminished the value of a separate property residence by any action including legal action, he becomes liable for reimbursement of associated financial losses. I watched Diane's expression carefully. Just for a flicker, something crossed her face. Annoyance, maybe, or calculation. Claire's eyes widened. Legal action. What does that mean? Martin didn't answer immediately. He looked at Charles. Explain why a premarital agreement between Ethan and Claire includes language discouraging legal action related to a separate property residence. Charles shifted in his seat. It's simply to prevent frivolous litigation. Martin's voice stayed calm. Frivolous litigation is prevented by courts, not by secret penalties in a prenup. Claire turned to her mother. Mom, what is this about? Diane's voice snapped. It's about protecting you from being dragged into some future dispute. Claire shook her head. That doesn't make sense. Martin looked at me briefly, then back to the table. This agreement also includes an attachment referencing an existing obligation tied to that property, yet no obligation is disclosed in the asset schedule. Charles's jaw tightened. We can revise the schedule. Do that, Martin said. Today, before we proceed. Charles glanced at Diane. Diane didn't nod. She didn't speak. She just stared at Claire. Stared the way a parent stares when they're silently ordering you to obey. And Claire did something small but enormous. She broke eye contact with her mother and looked at Martin. I want to know what Stonebridge is, Claire said, voice steadying as she spoke. I'm not signing anything I don't understand. Diane's face went hard. Claire's chin lifted. Mom, stop. Silence dropped over the room like a heavy cloth. For a second I forgot to breathe, because I knew what that moment cost Claire. It wasn't just defiance, it was breaking a lifetime pattern. Diane turned to Charles, voice clipped. Take a break. Charles nodded quickly, relieved to have an excuse to pause. Yes, we can recess for 10 minutes. Diane stood and walked out first, heels clicking like punctuation. Claire stayed seated, trembling. I squeezed her hand. You did great, I whispered. Claire swallowed. I feel like I just jumped off a cliff. Martin waited until the door shut, then leaned forward. Claire, he said gently, I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. Do you believe your mother is hiding something related to that property? Claire stared at the tabletop, then whispered. I don't know. Martin nodded once. Okay, then we proceed like adults. We request documentation. He turned to me. And Ethan, about those emails. I slid my laptop toward him again. Martin opened the email chain and didn't just read the text. He clicked into the details, the headers, the metadata, the way he'd asked. What are you looking for? I asked quietly. Martin's eyes moved across the screen, focused. Timing, authorship, transmission. Claire looked up. Why does that matter? Martin didn't answer immediately. He clicked, scrolled, clicked again. Then he paused. His face didn't change much, but his tone tightened just slightly when he spoke. This draft, he said, was not created when they told you it was created. My stomach dropped. What do you mean? Martin pointed at the screen. The attachment's metadata and the email timeline don't align. There's evidence of earlier versions, earlier edits, before the date Benton's office claimed it was prepared. Claire's voice went small. So, my mom had this ready before she even told us? Martin looked at her. Possibly. Or it was revised in response to something else, and they're trying to make it look routine. I felt my pulse in my throat. In response to what else? Martin closed the laptop gently, like he didn't want the computer to hear. That, he said, is the question we're going to force them to answer, without accusing, without yelling, and without giving them time to rewrite their story. The door opened then. Diane and Charles came back in, faces reset into polite professionalism. Diane sat down, eyes cool. "Are we ready to be reasonable again?" Martin looked at her, calm as ever. "Yes." He slid a single page across the table toward Charles. "We're requesting disclosure," Martin said, "within 7 days. Documentation of the Stonebridge interest, any related obligations, and an explanation of why the draft includes deterrent language regarding legal action." Charles glanced at the page, then looked at Diane. Diane didn't even pick it up. "No." Martin's tone didn't change. "Then there is no agreement." Diane's gaze snapped to Claire. "Claire, tell him." Claire's hands shook, but her voice came out clear. "Mom, I'm not telling anyone anything until I understand what this is." Diane stared at her daughter like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. Then Diane smiled, slow, controlled, and frighteningly calm. "Fine," she said. "If you want to do this the hard way, we can do it the hard way." And in that moment, sitting in that quiet office with my lawyer beside me and my fiancée finding her spine in real time, I realized something with absolute certainty. Diane wasn't afraid of me taking Claire's money. She was afraid of us looking too closely at hers. Diane's hard way didn't come with a raised voice or a slammed door. It came with a quiet campaign, phone calls, concerned relatives, and a steady drip of doubt meant to soak into Claire's resolve until she started questioning herself. Within 24 hours, Claire's aunt called her. I wasn't in the room for that conversation, but I heard Claire's side from my living room couch, her back stiff, her voice polite and clipped. "Aunt Melissa, I'm not accusing anyone," Claire said. "I'm asking what Stonebridge is." Pause. "Yes, I know Mom is stressed." Pause. "No, Ethan isn't forcing me to do anything. He's literally the one staying calm." Pause. "I have to go." She hung up and stared at the phone like it was another legal document she didn't want to open. "What did she say?" I asked quietly. Claire's mouth twisted. "That Mom is just trying to protect me, and that I'm letting strangers influence me." "Strangers," I repeated, glancing toward the hallway as if Diane could hear us from across town. "Your mother's favorite word for anyone she can't control." Claire nodded, then rubbed her forehead. "She implied you're manipulating me with the lawyer." I felt a flash of anger, but it burned out fast. Anger would only feed the narrative Diane was building. Instead, I said, "Claire, do you feel manipulated?" Claire looked at me like she was offended by the idea. "No." "Then we keep going," I said. That same night, Diane called Claire directly. Claire didn't put it on speaker. She took it to the balcony, but the glass door was thin and the night was quiet. I didn't try to listen, but I heard enough. The cadence of Diane's voice rising and falling, the way Claire's replies got shorter and more strained. When Claire came back in, her eyes were bright with tears she refused to let drop. She said if I don't sign, she's not paying for the wedding, Claire whispered. My stomach tightened. "Is she paying?" Claire laughed once, bitter. She offered. We didn't ask. She insisted. "Then we pay for it ourselves," I said. Claire's face crumpled for just a second. "Ethan, it's not about the money. It's about the message." I nodded slowly. "I know. The message was, obey, or lose comfort. Obey, or lose approval. Obey, or lose family peace." Diane wasn't negotiating a prenup. She was training her daughter back into the old role. Over the next week, Martin did exactly what he said he would do. He didn't accuse, and he didn't chase. He requested documentation formally, in writing, with clear deadlines. He also asked for something I didn't expect. "Ethan," he told me on the phone, "I want Claire to request information too. Not through us. From her mother, directly, in writing." "Why?" I asked. "Because when family hides behind 'I'm your mother,' it helps to remind them the daughter is a legal adult," Martin said. "And because a written response or refusal matters." Claire agreed, even though I could tell it made her nauseous. She drafted an email to Diane that was almost painfully respectful. "Mom, I'm willing to proceed with a prenup, but I need clarity on the Stonebridge property references and any obligations tied to it. Please provide documentation or a written explanation by Friday." She showed it to me before sending. "It feels like I'm betraying her," Claire whispered. I held her hand. "You're not betraying her. You're asking for the truth in a contract that's supposed to govern your life." Claire hit send. Then we waited. Friday came. No response. Saturday afternoon, Diane texted Claire instead. "Emails are for lawyers and enemies. Call me like a daughter." Claire stared at the text for a long time, thumb hovering, and I watched her fight the urge to fold back into the old pattern. Finally she typed, "I'll talk, but I still need the documentation in writing." Diane didn't reply after that, Martin wasn't surprised. Control hates paper, he said dryly. The 7-day deadline expired with nothing from Charles Benton's office either. No documentation, no clarification, no revised schedule. Just silence, as if they could starve the issue out and we'd eventually get tired and sign. Instead, Martin escalated. Still professional, still calm. He sent another letter requesting disclosure and noting that refusal to clarify third-party interests would require removing those provisions entirely. And that's when we got a response. Not a letter, an invitation. Diane wanted another family dinner. Claire read the message out loud in my kitchen. Sunday at 6. Richard and I want to clear the air. No lawyers. Just family. Bring the prenup. Claire's voice shook on the last words. I let the silence sit for a moment because I wanted Claire to decide what she wanted, not what her fear wanted. Then I asked, "Do you want to go?" Claire stared at the counter, jaw tight. "Part of me wants to, because I'm tired." I nodded. "And the other part?" Claire looked up at me. "The other part knows it's a trap. It was the same trap as before. Isolate, pressure, perform." I said, "If we go, we don't go alone." Claire's eyebrows lifted. "You mean with Martin?" "I mean with boundaries," I said. "And we don't bring the prenup. Not unless Martin says so." Claire exhaled slowly. "Mom will lose it." "She's already losing it," I replied. Claire's mouth twitched at that, almost a smile. "We told Diane we'd come for dinner, but we would not discuss signatures without counsel." Diane responded with a thumbs up, which somehow felt more hostile than any insult. Sunday evening, we drove to her parents' house with the kind of heavy quiet you get before a storm. I kept one hand on the wheel and one thought in my head. Stay calm, stay clear, stay kind to Claire. Diane greeted us at the door like nothing had happened. "Sweetheart," she said to Claire, hugging her tightly, then turning to me with a smile that didn't touch her eyes. "Ethan," I nodded. "Diane." Richard was in the living room, standing too straight, like he'd been told where to stand. He shook my hand and said, "Let's just have a nice dinner." The table was set for 4 this time. No aunt, no cousin, no audience, which should have felt better. Instead, it felt worse because without the audience, Diane didn't need the performance. She could be direct. Dinner started politely. Diane asked Claire about work. Richard talked about a neighbor's new car. I played along, answering where appropriate, keeping things light. Then plates were cleared, and Diane placed her hands on the table. "I want to understand," she said, "why you're doing this." Claire stiffened. "Doing what?" "This lawyer charade," Diane replied smoothly. "This suspicion, this disrespect." I kept my voice level. "Diane, your attorney sent a contract with unusual clauses. We asked for clarification. We haven't received any." Diane looked at me like I'd spoken out of turn. "I didn't ask you." Claire's eyes flashed. "Mom." Diane pivoted immediately to Claire, voice softening. "Sweetheart, you're letting him turn you against your family." Claire swallowed. "I'm asking questions." Diane's smile tightened. "Questions don't require lawyers." I said, "They do when the answers affect legal obligations." Diane finally showed a hint of irritation. "Ethan, I have tolerated your tone because I'm trying to keep peace. But let's be honest, this is about you not wanting to sign because you don't like that you won't get access to Claire's resources." Claire's face went red. "Mom, stop saying that." Diane raised an eyebrow at her daughter. "Then prove me wrong. Sign." There it was again. The same script. The same corner. I set my fork down carefully. "We're not signing tonight." Diane's lips pressed together. "Then you're hiding something." I almost laughed at how predictable it was. But I didn't. Instead I said, "If someone is hiding something, it's the person refusing to explain the Stonebridge clause." Richard's head snapped up. "Stonebridge again." Claire turned to him. "Dad, do you know what it is?" Richard looked genuinely confused. Then he glanced at Diane quickly, like a kid checking with a parent before answering. Diane didn't look at him. She looked at me. "Stonebridge," Diane said, "is none of your business." I leaned back slightly. "It's in the contract. That makes it our business." Diane's eyes hardened. "You are not part of this family yet." Claire's voice shook, but it came out strong. "And if you keep doing this, he never will be." That landed like a plate breaking in the kitchen. Richard's face went pale. Diane went very still. For a moment I thought Diane might explode. Instead, she did something colder. She stood up, walked to a sideboard, and pulled out a folder, thick, organized, with labeled tabs. She returned to the table and set it down in front of Claire. "Here," Diane said. If you want paperwork, have paperwork. Claire stared at it like it might be radioactive. What is that? Evidence, Diane said, calm again, of why I'm protecting you. My skin prickled. Evidence of what? Diane's gaze stayed on Claire. I ran a background check on Ethan. Claire's head snapped up. You did what? Diane shrugged lightly. I did my job as a mother. Claire's voice rose. That's insane. Diane opened the folder and slid out printed pages, public records, address history, employment confirmations, credit summaries. Not enough to ruin me, but enough to violate my privacy and make a point. I felt heat rise in my chest, but I forced it down. This was exactly what Diane wanted. Me reacting so she could call me unstable. Claire was the one who reacted, and honestly, I was proud of her. Mom, Claire said, voice shaking with anger now. This is disgusting. Diane's expression didn't change. It's careful. Claire pushed the papers back toward Diane. You don't get to do this. Diane's eyes flicked to me. Do you see? She's emotional. That's why she needs me. I said, you don't need to protect Claire from me. You need to protect your control over her. Richard finally spoke, voice low. Diane, that's enough. Diane turned on him. Don't start, Richard. Richard's jaw tightened, but he fell silent. That told me a lot, and none of it was good. Claire stood up. I can't do this. Diane looked up at her, voice sharpening. Sit down. Claire didn't sit. Diane's eyes narrowed. If you walk out, don't expect me to keep funding this wedding. Claire's breath shook. Keep your money. Diane's face hardened. Fine. And don't expect this family to welcome you back when this goes wrong. Claire's eyes filled, but her voice stayed steady. What goes wrong is you, Mom, not him. Then she walked away from the table toward the foyer. I stood too, quietly. I didn't say anything. I just followed her. Behind us, Diane's voice cut through the house, sharp and controlled. Claire, don't be dramatic. Claire didn't turn around. We got in the car and drove for a few minutes before either of us spoke. Claire stared out the window like she was watching her old life shrink behind us. I'm sorry, she whispered. I shook my head. You don't apologize for setting boundaries. Claire swallowed hard. Did she really do a background check? Yes, I said softly. She did. Claire's hands clenched. I feel stupid. Like I should have known she'd do that. You're not stupid, I said. You're used to normal people rules. Diane doesn't play by those. We got back to my townhouse, and Claire went straight to the couch, curling up like she was trying to make herself smaller. I sat beside her, careful not to crowd her. I don't want to lose my family, she said, voice cracking. I nodded. I know. And I don't want to lose you, she added, barely audible. I turned toward her. You won't. Claire looked at me, eyes wet. What if she's right? What if marriage really is just contracts and leverage? I took a breath. Marriage has legal parts, but it's not supposed to be a hostage situation. Claire let out a shaky laugh that turned into a sob. I pulled her into my arms and held her while she cried, not because she was weak, but because she'd finally stopped pretending this was normal. Later that night, after Claire fell asleep in my bed, my phone buzzed. It was Martin. I stepped into the hallway and answered quietly. Hey. Martin's voice was controlled but urgent in the way lawyers get when they've found something that changes the shape of the whole situation. Ethan, he said, I need you to listen carefully. My stomach tightened. Okay. I reviewed the prenup again, Martin continued, and I found language that isn't just unusual. It's targeted. Targeted how? I asked. Martin paused. There's a clause buried in the miscellaneous section. It references an indemnification, specifically tied to claims arising from an undisclosed obligation connected to a property interest. My pulse thudded in my ears. Stonebridge. Yes, Martin said, but it's worse than that. I leaned against the wall, trying to keep my breathing steady. What did you find? Martin's voice dropped slightly, like he didn't want the words to echo. The clause is written in a way that could make you financially responsible if that obligation is challenged after the marriage, especially if it's challenged by someone with standing. My mouth went dry. Someone with standing like Claire. Like Claire, Martin confirmed. A cold, steady anger slid into my chest. Not the hot anger that makes you reckless. The cold anger that makes you precise. So Diane's protection is actually, I started, a shield for something else, Martin finished, and a muzzle for Claire. I stared down the dark hallway of my own home, feeling like I was looking down the barrel of something that had been pointed at us from the beginning. What do we do? I asked. Martin didn't hesitate. We stopped treating this like a family disagreement. We treat it like a legal trap. Tomorrow I want Claire in my office. Okay, I said. And Ethan, Martin added, I also want you to forward me every message Diane has sent since this started. Texts, emails, anything. Why? I asked, though I already had a sense. Because the pattern matters, Martin said. And because if that clause is what I think it is, we're going to need to prove intent. Intent. That word sat heavy in my stomach after I hung up. I went back into the bedroom and looked at Claire sleeping, her face still puffy from crying, her hand curled near her chin like she was protecting herself even in sleep. I thought about Diane's smile at the dinner table. I thought about her calm insistence. And I thought about something Martin had said earlier. Sometimes the story isn't just in the contract. Sometimes it's in how the contract moves. Diane had been rushing us for a reason. Not because she was afraid I'd take Claire's money. Because she was afraid Claire would realize the contract was designed to take something from her. Quietly, legally, and forever. The next morning, while Claire got ready for work, I sat at my kitchen table and pulled up the prenup draft again. I scrolled slowly to the miscellaneous section. And when I found that clause, 3 dense paragraphs buried between boilerplate, my stomach dropped again. It didn't read like protection. It read like confession, written in legal language. And I suddenly understood why Diane had wanted my signature at a dinner table, with wine and witnesses and pressure. Because if we signed without reading it properly, she could hide the truth in plain sight. But now we'd seen it, and Diane didn't know yet just how carefully my lawyer had been reading. The next day, Claire and I sat in Martin's conference room again, but this time it was just the 3 of us. No Diane, no Charles Benton, no polished smiles. Claire looked exhausted, like someone who'd spent a week holding a door shut while a storm tried to force its way inside. Her posture was straight, but her eyes were bruised with stress. Martin placed 3 stacks of paper on the table. 1, he said, tapping the first stack, is the prenup draft you were given. 2, he continued, tapping the second, is the email chain and attachment metadata. And 3, he said, tapping the last stack, is what we pulled from public records this morning. Claire's throat bobbed as she swallowed. Public records. About Stonebridge. Martin nodded once. Yes. I watched Claire's face as it slowly changed from confusion to dread. Martin slid 1 page toward her. This is a property record summary. The Stonebridge address referenced in the draft is owned by an LLC. Not by your parents. Not by you. But, he paused and pointed at a line. There's a lien, he said. A secured obligation. And the borrower name attached to the original filing is you. Claire stared. What? Her voice sounded like it came from somewhere far away. Martin stayed calm. The loan documents we can see are limited, but the filing shows your name connected to an obligation. That alone explains why the prenup tried to build an indemnification shield. Claire's hands flew to her mouth. No, that's not possible. I never signed anything. I felt my stomach twist as cold anger rose again, steady and controlled. Martin looked at her gently. Claire, I'm not saying you knowingly did, but something was filed in a way that created a connection between you and that debt. Claire's eyes filled with tears. My mom. I reached across the table and held her hand. Claire's fingers were ice cold. Martin waited a beat, then slid the prenup draft toward us, open to the clause I'd found. This, he said, is the hidden clause. It's buried in miscellaneous because that's where people stop reading. He looked at Claire. I'm going to read it out loud, slowly, so you can hear what it really says. Claire nodded barely. Martin read. The language was dense. Indemnification, reimbursement, waiver of claims, consent to maintain separate obligations, limitation of legal action regarding third-party secured interests. But underneath the legal phrasing, the meaning was simple. If the marriage happened, and if Claire later discovered the Stonebridge obligation and tried to challenge it, through litigation, through a claim of fraud, through any action that would jeopardize the loan, then I would be financially responsible for the fallout. I would have to reimburse, cover losses, and essentially absorb the damage. Not to protect Claire, to protect the people who tied her to it, and to make sure if Claire ever fought back, the cost would land on her husband. Claire started shaking. I'm going to throw up, she whispered. I stood, grabbed a trash bin from the corner, and brought it to her without saying anything. Claire didn't get sick, but she held it like a lifeline, breathing through her nose, eyes shut tight. When she opened them again, they were different. Not just hurt, awake. How do we prove it? Claire asked, voice hoarse. How do we prove they knew, that they did this on purpose? Martin slid the email stack closer. Because the contract moved the way it moves when someone is trying to bury something, he said. And because your mother's attorney's emails aren't as clean as he thinks. He turned my laptop toward Claire and opened the email chain. Here, he said, pointing to the attachment history. The file metadata shows the document was edited weeks earlier than the date they claimed it was prepared. It also shows the author line, the internal file9 history, and revision timestamps. Claire stared hard, like she was trying to force the truth to rearrange itself into something less ugly. Martin continued, and in the email chain there are references to keeping the family property protections intact, and making sure the fiancé signs before he gets independent counsel. Not those exact words, but the intent is there. I swallowed. Is it enough? It's enough to confront, Martin said, and it's enough to make them nervous. Then he added, we're also going to notarize and timestamp our copy of the draft in the email headers today. That way they can't claim we altered anything later. Claire nodded slowly, wiping tears from her cheeks with the heel of her hand like she was angry at herself for crying. What happens next? She asked. Martin leaned back. We give Diane a choice, full explanation and corrective action, or we take steps to protect Claire legally. Claire's voice sharpened. Corrective action like what? Martin didn't sugarcoat it. Removing your name from any obligation you didn't authorize, correcting filings, and if fraud occurred, that becomes a separate issue. A long silence settled. Then Claire said something that made my chest ache with pride and sadness at the same time. I want to meet them, she said. I looked at her. Claire. She held up a hand. Not alone. Not at their house. Here. With you and Martin. Martin nodded. That's the right instinct. Claire's jaw tightened. I want them to hear it out loud. I want them to understand I'm not signing anything, and I'm not being cornered anymore. Martin scheduled the meeting for 2 days later. He sent a formal notice to Charles Benton. We would be discussing outstanding disclosure requests and a material clause concern. No accusations in the letter, no emotional language, just professional gravity. Diane arrived on time. This time she didn't walk in early. She didn't bring extra confidence. She walked in like someone who'd been told there was a crack in the foundation and wasn't sure how deep it went. Charles Benton was with her, but his smile was gone. When everyone sat, Martin didn't start with small talk. He looked at Charles and said, we have concerns about an indemnification clause tied to a Stonebridge obligation, and we have reasons to believe Claire's name has been attached to a debt without her informed consent. Diane's face twitched. Just once. Claire's voice came out steady, even though I could see the tremor in her fingers. Mom, what is Stonebridge? Diane opened her mouth, then closed it. Richard wasn't supposed to be there, but he was. He sat slightly behind Diane, quiet, his eyes darting between everyone like a man watching the walls shift. Charles cleared his throat. This is an unfortunate misunderstanding. Martin's tone stayed flat. It's not a misunderstanding if it required a hidden clause. Then Martin did the thing Diane had been terrified of from the beginning. He read the clause out loud, slowly, clearly, with the calm voice of someone holding a mirror up to a lie. As the words filled the room, Diane's posture stiffened. Richard's face went gray. Charles Benton stared down at his notes like he wished the table would open and swallow him. Claire didn't blink. When Martin finished, he set the page down and said, "Explain why this is in the contract." Diane's voice came sharp, defensive. "It's standard." Martin didn't react. "It is not." Claire leaned forward slightly. "Mom," she said, quieter now, "did you put me on a loan?" Diane's eyes snapped to her daughter, and for a split second the mask slipped. The look wasn't protective. It was angry. "How dare you," Diane hissed. "After everything I've done." Claire cut her off. "Answer the question." Richard finally spoke, voice low and strained. "Diane." Diane swung her gaze toward him. "Not now." Martin's voice stayed measured. "Diane, you have two options. You provide a full written explanation, documentation, and corrective steps to remove Claire's name from any obligation she did not authorize, or we escalate to protect our client." Charles swallowed. "We can look into the filings." Claire's voice rose, the first real crack of emotion breaking through her control. "Look into it. My name is on something and you're saying look into it." Diane snapped. "Claire, stop talking like a victim." That was the moment everything changed. Claire leaned back slightly, and the tears in her eyes dried into something harder. "I'm not talking like a victim," she said. "I'm talking like an adult who finally read the fine print you hoped I'd never see." Silence. Diane's lips parted, but no words came out. Martin slid another paper across the table. Our notarized timestamp summary, the email chain with headers, the metadata printouts. "We also have preserved evidence of the document's drafting timeline," Martin said calmly. So if anyone intends to claim this clause was accidental, that will be difficult. Charles's face tightened. Martin, let's not what? Claire interrupted, eyes locked on her mother. Let's not admit what you did. Richard's hands trembled as he rubbed them together. Claire, please. Claire turned to him, and her voice softened just a fraction. Dad, did you know? Richard's eyes darted to Diane again. He didn't answer. And somehow, that silence was an answer. Claire nodded slowly, like she'd just accepted a truth that hurt too much to fight anymore. Then she stood. I'm done, she said. Diane's head snapped up. Done with what? Claire looked at her mother, and her voice didn't shake at all now. Done with letting you rewrite my reality, she said. Done with you calling my fiancé a gold digger while you hide behind contracts. Done with you treating love like leverage. Diane stood too, furious. You're making a mistake. Claire nodded once. Maybe. But it'll be my mistake, not yours. Then Claire turned to Martin. What are my next steps? Martin's voice was steady. We file for clarification and correction of any unauthorized obligations. We request full documentation. And we halt all prenup discussions permanently, unless and until disclosures are complete. Claire looked at me. I'm sorry, she whispered. And this time the apology wasn't guilt. It was grief. I stood and took her hand. I'm right here. We left the meeting with Diane standing in the conference room, stunned and furious, and Charles Benton avoiding everyone's eyes. In the weeks that followed, the truth didn't come out as a dramatic confession. It came out the way truth usually does when paperwork is involved, through records, responses, and the slow collapse of a story that can't hold weight. Martin filed formal requests. The Stonebridge obligation was real. The LLC ownership structure was real. The timeline was real. And Claire's connection to it had been manufactured through a combination of filings and authorization that Claire insisted she never gave. Once that process started, Diane's tone changed. Suddenly, she wanted to repair the relationship. Suddenly, she wanted to move forward. Suddenly, she wanted to meet for coffee. Claire didn't. Claire didn't scream. She didn't post online. She didn't make it a spectacle. She did something far more devastating to a woman like Diane. Claire stopped responding to manipulation. We didn't have a big, expensive wedding. We scaled it down to something simple. A small ceremony with my sister, 2 close friends, and a judge at the courthouse. Claire wore a dress she chose for herself, not one Diane approved. We went to dinner afterward, just the 2 of us. And for the first time in months, Claire smiled like her body remembered what peace felt like. My relationship with Diane never recovered. And honestly, it wasn't supposed to. Richard sent one text weeks later. I hope you both find happiness. Claire read it, set the phone down, and said quietly, I hope he does too, but not at my expense. That was the line in the sand. The justice in all of it wasn't that Diane went to jail or got dragged out of a room in handcuffs. Real life isn't always that neat. The justice was that the weapon she tried to use, a contract designed to corner me, became the document that exposed her. She wanted a prenup to label me as a threat. Instead, her own clauses pointed straight at the thing she'd been hiding. And the most satisfying part, the part that still stays with me when I think about it late at night, is that Diane didn't lose because I outshouted her. She lost because we refused to play her game on her terms. We stayed calm. We asked for paper. We insisted on clarity. And Claire, the person Diane thought she could control forever, looked at a legal clause, looked at her own mother, and chose herself. If there's a lesson I took from this, it's simple. Anyone can demand trust when they're holding all the power. But the moment you ask for transparency, you find out who was never offering trust in the first place, only compliance. And if someone needs you to sign quickly, in private, under pressure, before you make it complicated with your own counsel, it's almost never because the document is clean. It's because the truth inside it isn't.